fixed instantaneous power. But at this load level, yes, it is pulsating.
Why is it not good to have a pulsating fluid?
Well, I mean, if you look at it like P is equal to T omega, and if you, for example, want something which is constant speed, and P is pulsating, then you would have to pulsate the torque. So from the machine drives per point of view, any motor or anything from that point of view, it doesn't instantaneous power. So you won't have hunting, you won't have those kind of issues if your instantaneous power is balanced.
How difficult is it to convert from DC to AC?
It's not difficult to convert from DC to AC.
Soman, can you repeat the question because we want to record the question and the answer. This question was audible.
Yeah. Did not get started.
No, yeah, it's started.
So the question was that how difficult it is to convert DC to AC. And so it's not really difficult. You use a three-phase inverter, and basically so you have something like a battery. I don't remember the full circuit diagram, but it is I don't remember it, but you can use an inverter, which is a connection of three such limbs of rectifier, and then anyway, so you have a rectifier and the converse of it is inverter. So what you do is, if you use an inverter, you can convert a DC to AC. So by appropriately managing the switching in the three phases. So this has to be connected. You look up anywhere in a book, you will see the circuit diagram also. You have to switch these elements appropriately and get it into a three-phase inverted waveform. So that's essentially what, for example, a high voltage DC transmission does. In a HVDC line, for example, what you are doing is you are converting AC first to DC through a rectifier, then putting a transmission line, long distance transmission line, and transmitting the power. At the other end of it, again you have a AC system, so you convert it back from DC to AC and then feed it into the grid. So for example, if you look at Talcher Kolar line or closer room Chandrapur Padge is just Thane, close to Thane. These are or Rihan, Dadri. So all these lines, if you look at it, one end of it is a generation hub. Talcher, Chandrapur, big generation hub. Rihan, cold core, basically at the coal belt near the eastern MP, end of UP, eastern MP, in that region. And you are transmitting. Kolar is as good as Bangalore. So, Padge is as good as Mumbai. Dadri is as good as Delhi. So these are the load centers. So you have very strong generating hubs where you can generate thousands of megawatts, and you want to transmit it long distance. At a long distance, what you are doing is, instead of transmitting it to a AC line, you are first stepping it up for the same reason as I told you earlier, using transformer to a high voltage level, which is AC. Then I'll explain some of the issues later on. But then, instead of sending it through a AC transmission line, you are rectifying it, so it becomes a DC line. So the issues which are related to reactive power, stability, constraints, some of those limitations which reduce the transmission capability of a line are not encountered in DC. So you convert it to DC, transmit the power over DC long distance, but then again finally your grid is AC, so reconvert it back to AC and step it down and take it to your load center. So HVDC is also used. This block is implemented using thyristors, not at amperes levels. It's done using thyristors. Switching can be controlled, and they are costly blocks. So that's why they are not used only. They become economical when power has to be transmitted over very large distances where cost of AC transmission becomes prohibitive. I will explain some of those issues. But you have converters, you have rectifiers, and you have inverters, which are implemented by power electronic devices.
So,
yeah.
So by PMU device, we can check the phasor difference between different phases. So what conclusion I can make by this PMU device by seeing this phase difference or different?
Yeah, I'll come to PMU device when I come to PMU.
What does the waveform look like when you put in an AC? What does the DC look like? Is it
Ripple is there. No, ripple will be
What
there.
kind of ripple does it look like?
What kind of ripple?
I mean, it's not direct straight line, right?
Yeah. So you would have a ripple like this on it. So you would use a smoothing reactor typically. A large smoothing reactor would be used to smoothen that out. And other thing is that like you can have to reduce the ripple, instead of using a 6 pulse converter, you can use a 12 pulse converter. So more the number of this. So what you can do is you can have two such blocks connected in series, and let's say one is a delta-delta 3-phase transformer and another is a delta star 3-phase transformer. Then there will be a phase shifting of 30 degrees here also, and then you connect to it and then sum it up in this thing. So this spread ripple will kind of further smoothen it out. And then to get a constant current, you put a big smoothing reactor here and then take care of this side.
What's the reactor?
Reactor is basically an inductor. Reactor is basically an inductor. We say that current across an inductor cannot change instantaneously. So that I mean, in other words, it takes much more. It helps you. These are like filters. In some sense, they are like filters. So you can devise filters by inductors and capacitors, essentially. Yeah.
So when we distribute three phases from the three-phase transformer to different loads, so don't we have to take care that these loads are somewhat equivalent?
Yeah, we take care of that. We have to. So
in real situations when we cannot predict the usage of the consumers in three different phases, how do we take care of that?
no, we ask, no, when we give connection, we make an assessment, what is the connected load, how much load, what kind of load, how much of it is single phase load, how much of it is three phase load. So we take all that into consideration and then only connect it. Most of our loads are single phase loads. So if you look at a building, for example, which is predominantly single phase load, then one building of similar size you will give from one phase, another building you will give from another phase. So one level up at in the distribution system, it will look balanced.
But once in a while the balance may be off.
No, so there is always some unbalance. There is always some unbalance, but it is typically less than 5%. Means you cannot get an ideal perfect balanced system, but the unbalance will be 5 to 10%, typically below 5%.
How it may affect the transformer level of the generation?
Transformer will not see any problem. The problem is in the generator. You will have a problem. You will have unnecessary extra heating taking place in the generator. So that heating is unwarranted. Heating will take place, and whatever I told you about the fact that this pulsating torques will not be there, that will not happen. When unbalance is there, we will see some pulsating torque in the system. Some of these things will come in the so see, this much light was there yesterday also. Okay, so these are the three phase supplies that we voltages, generated voltages that we talked of yesterday, day before yesterday, and we said that sinusoids have basically two things, amplitude and angle. If frequency is constant, then there are only two things which characterize a sinusoid, which is the magnitude and which is another is the angle. So because of that, addition of two sinusoids is equivalently addition of two vectors. You have to just find this magnitude part and you have to just find this angle part, and that can be done using mapping of vectors, which is for every sinusoid take its amplitude, take its angle, write them as vectors, sum it over, find the new resultant vector. If its angle is Vm if its magnitude is Vm, amplitude is Vm and angle is phi, then, and if sine is for example reference, then this is Vm sine of omega t plus phi. So this addition, trigonometric addition, is simply captured by a algebraic addition of vectors, and therefore all of our work is done using these vectors which are called as phasors. And for convenience, instead of taking the magnitude of the vectors, we take RMS values of the vectors, and that is, so when we say 100, we don't mean the amplitude of it, it's the 100 by root 2 which we specify, which is the root mean square, value of this thing. And the advantage of root mean square is that root mean square, for example, if a resistor was connected to it, then the power which is dissipated in the resistor in one cycle is simply I square R. So those kind of power calculations using RMS values don't have to carry a factor of 2 everywhere around. Otherwise, RMS value of a 1 ampere sinusoid is 1 by 2 and you will have to carry that factor. So it's just a matter of convenience. And this is what is known as the phasor. Okay. Then, okay, so we got it. So the point is, when we do any phasor addition or so on, it always is that all the phasors have to be at the same frequency. So it doesn't make sense to talk of two phasors if one is at 50 Hz and another is at 75 Hz or any other frequency. So all the whenever we are talking of phasor mathematics, we are doing it, all of them are at one frequency only. Then we saw that Kirchhoff's current law and Kirchhoff's voltage law is equally valid in the phasor domain. So therefore, the summation of algebraic sum of phasor currents in a node is 0, and algebraic sum of the phasor voltages across a loop is also 0, just like with the instantaneous quantities. And instantaneous power, we saw that was product of instantaneous voltage into instantaneous current, and if this is the instantaneous voltage and this is the instantaneous current, then a little bit of trigonometry shows you that this instantaneous power is Vrms, Irms into cos of phi minus cos of 2 omega t minus phi. So therefore, there is a double frequency oscillation across a average power, and so we said that the single phase power is essentially a pulsating power. And if you look at its average value over a cycle, the average value is essentially the first term, because the double frequency sinusoid over a cycle will have 0 average. All the it's the integration is nothing but area under the curve, and if it is at fundamental frequency or any harmonic frequency, then a sinusoid or a cosinusoid will have zero net area, because positive lobes will be cancelled by the negative lobes. And so the average power becomes Vrms Irms cos phi. Only the first term contributes, the second term does not contribute. So Vrms Irms is called the apparent power, because to begin with we think of power as voltage into current, but we are getting only Vrms Irms cos phi, which is the actual real power which we are getting out. This is called the apparent power. And in some sense, so the power P, average power P per cycle, which I just call as active power or real power, by the apparent power is a sense of efficiency of power transfer, so it's called power factor. And since it is cos phi, since P is, so this P is equal to S into cos phi, this term is S, so since power factor will be between, because it is cos phi, it is between -1 to +1, so it cannot be anywhere outside of that. And we have a notion of lagging current and leading current. So if, for example, think of this as one sinusoid, this is a reference sinusoid, let's say this is voltage, and so let's say this is the current, so you can see that this zero crossing, equivalent zero crossing, is time delayed with respect to this zero crossing. So I will say that this current waveform therefore is lagging. And let's say suppose this angle is 30 degrees, for example, let us say. Then if this will be shown by a vector, or what I call it as phasor, and suppose I take this as a reference. So the first one will be V, then this is the I, and it is 30 degrees behind. So this is Vm sine of omega of t. Then the other one is Im sine of omega t minus 30 degrees, because of the fact that it is lagging by 30 degrees. And this V is Vm by root 2, and this, what I am plotting here is Im by root 2, and this is to equivalent to saying that current is lagging the voltage by 30 degrees, and average power per cycle, or the active power, is Vi cos phi. So I can say that, so the point is that cos phi, cos of minus 30 degrees and cos of plus 30 degrees is same, right? Both of it is root 3 by 2 or 0.866. So therefore, in the English description, to describe this, I will say that power factor is 0.866 lagging, and if it was a situation like this, the active power done per cycle is still the same, but then I will describe it by saying that power factor is 0.866 leading.
So what is the practical meaning of lagging and leading power factor?
Yeah, I will come to that. Once I discuss reactive power, I will be able to explain its significance a bit more clearly. So now, if you look at this from this, if you look at this that the average power per cycle, which is the active power, is Vi cos phi. It's like projecting this onto this V axis, this vector onto this V axis. This is the I cos phi, so you got P equal to Vi cos phi, and this quadrature component is something which you could not make use of, the Vi sin phi. This length is Vi sin phi, and Vi sin phi is something which kind of you lost. If the phi was 0, you would get the complete Vi is available to you as active power, but now this quadrature component is not available, which is not available to you, is called reactive power.
So lagging, more lagging is more loss.
More reactive power.
Meaning, so what is the intuitive meaning of reactive power?
Yeah, so reactive power is something, it's like this, that your voltage is also there, current is also there. Apparently you could have done something equivalent of this, but you are not able to do that. You are able to do only Vi cos phi. So if, for example, the angle is 90 degrees, then the average power that you will get is 0. So all that Vi, we say that it is simply reactive, it's not doing anything. That is the quadrature component. So that is what we call it as the reactive power. So power factor and reactive power are related terms. Improved power factor is equivalent to reducing the reactive power, or reducing reactive power is equivalent to improving the power
So you want
factor.
to keep the lag minimal.
Why don't we keep the lag minimal? We are not able to keep the lag minimal because our circuits are predominantly inductive. All our transmission systems, transmission lines, distribution lines, they are predominantly inductive elements, and unless even motors, all of them have iron in, transmission lines don't have iron, but they are also quite inductive circuits, but otherwise motors and everything has a lot of iron in it, which makes them essentially like an inductive circuits, and they inherently have that lag. Unless we do something like if it's an inductive element, you could bring capacitor into it in some way to compensate its effect. Then you are able to correct it. Otherwise, inherently they tend to lag or limit. Typically lag.
So you would essentially try and reduce the number of inductors between the point that power is generated and the point where it's consumed.
Yeah. So what we do, for example, sometimes what we do is, like, I know that transmission line is inductive and I have reached the limit, I am not able to push more power through it because of the fact that the reactance is creating a problem. Then to compensate it, sometimes I connect a series capacitor. So that will improve the power transfer capacity of a transmission line, for example. Because the capacitance, as I will show soon, is a block which sort of works in a different way, exactly opposite way with respect to the inductor.
But isn't there a loss in the capacitor also?
But that would be quite small. That would not be any issue. But if you could, for example, 30% of the transmission line inductance you compensate by a capacitor, your power transfer will increase by a factor of 1 by 0.7.
So if you have a huge server farm,
Yeah.
right, you can either have thick cables going to the server farm, which is near a city, or you can keep it right near the power station, and so you have minimal
Yeah,
lag.
so see, this is one way. Some places you also compensate it by connecting capacitors in shunt. When you talk of industrial consumers, this load generates some reactive power, and I want to compensate it because the utility charges me penalty for that. So what I do is, this reactive power is essentially inductive, so I connect a shunt capacitance. I don't connect it in series, I connect it in shunt. So it could be capacitors are used to compensate inductive power, but they could come in series or they could come in shunt. That depends upon the application.
So intuitively, like for instance in a home.
Yeah, I'll come to that. What happens intuitively, I'll come to that.
Sir, there is a term transmission loss. So
Yeah.
is this Vi sin phi is same as that? Or
No,
something?
that is I square R. Whenever I talk of loss, is the mod of, because it's a phasor, I am now putting a magnitude on it, and I mod I square r is the loss which, this is actual loss. Like if you are if you are having a grid, let's say, this is a real life example, our grid may be, let's say, having around 80,000 megawatts, and transmission loss is 4%. Transmission, I am not talking of distribution side technical loss. Distribution side technical loss may be around 8%. Not talking of thefts and things like that, unmetered and all that. So that means 80,000 into 4 by 100, which is 3200 megawatts. 3200 megawatts is just lost. Is I square. This is heat, simply goes as heat.
Can you repeat that again? That's one.
I said typically, like in India, transmission system losses are of the order of 4%.
1%.
4%. So if at our grid, suppose it is taking 80,000 megawatts, supplying 80,000 megawatts, the transmission system is supplying 80,000, carrying 80,000 megawatts, then roughly speaking it means 3200 megawatts is simply lost. So if you save on this losses, you can supply 3200 megawatts more.
So this is lost in the form of heat, right?
Yeah.
So for the in case of reactive power, what form is it? Is that
I'll come to reactive. I still am not done with my reactive power discussion. This is lost. When I say lost, I mean megawatts, watts or megawatts. So it's real. Okay. So this is the. So the reactive power is VI sin phi. So the reactive power is, I'll actually make it more precise, but since it is sin phi, you can see that which is plus minus 30 degrees will change the sign of the reactive power. Like it will be plus minus sine of 30 degrees. So with inductor, actually the apparent power is defined as, actually the apparent power itself is treated as a complex number, and it is defined as Vi star, which is to say, this is defined with inductor as the convention, which is to say that if this is voltage is V, current is lagging by an angle of phi, then this is V into I. Because it is lagging the reference by phi, I am writing it as minus phi, complex conjugate of it. So Vi e to the power j phi, or Vi cos phi plus j times Vi sin phi. So by this convention of S, apparent power is equal to Vi star, where star indicates complex conjugate, what we are saying is active power is Vi cos phi for an inductor. This is typically an inductive circuit. Lagging is usually an inductive circuit, and the reactive power is. So a lagging thing creates a positive reactive power. That's the only point. If you didn't have that star, the whole thing would have reversed the other way around. And with unity power factor, there is reactive power will become 0.
In practice, what is the maximum phi that you normally see?
90 degrees, 88 degrees, 89 degrees.
It's seen.
Yeah, you can see that.
That means you're hardly getting anything at the
Nothing,
end.
yeah. If you connect a inductor, for example, yeah, I have some slides coming on that. I was just looking at that. Yeah, so let's look at the behavior of the circuit element. So now I will analyze how a resistor will behave, how a inductor will behave, and how a capacitor will behave.
So
Yep.
then where the reactive power goes? In
It
what?
doesn't go anywhere. We'll come to let's wait for a couple of slides. I have some figures on it, so you will see that. I always say that many electrical engineers have retired, maybe even they died also without really understanding what reactive power was. So that's left for their next birth. So yeah, I mean, like a lot of people practice electrical engineering but really still have not figured out what is the mystery of reactive power. But there is really no mystery in it, but still it does have that kind of a feel around it. So V of t is, let's say we have connected a voltage source to a resistor. So V is this sinusoid, current is sinusoid. T explicitly to show that I am talking of instantaneous power, which is instantaneous voltage into current. This factor of this thing is incorrect, there is some mistake here. It should have been R. It should have been R here. V square is V square by R sine square phi of t. And if you do integration average over a cycle, it is simply this, power factor is 1. We have already seen the resistive element. So this is how it looks like. This is the voltage, scaled replica of it is the current, and product of it is this red line, which is the instantaneous power which is pulsating, and average area over the cycle is what you are measuring, which is Vi cos phi. So when you connect a wattmeter, that's what it is measuring, for example. Now let's take an inductor. So if the inductor current is sine of omega t plus phi, then the voltage which will be developed across the inductor, which is V equal to L di by dt, is essentially omega times L into Im cos of omega t plus phi. So you can see that there is a 90-degree phase shift which has come into the picture. I have captured that in that line there, and you can see that the current actually, if you plot it, you will see that the current is actually lagging by the 90 degrees. So sine and cos has a 90 degrees difference between them. Whether it is lag or lead, just plot it and you will notice that it's a 90 degrees this thing. And so the instantaneous power is instantaneous voltage into instantaneous current. So this expression, which is like same thing as saying that Vrms into Irms sine of 2 omega t plus 2 phi. So if you look at its average value, it's 0. Its average value is 0. So that means no work will be done by inductor. No work will actually get done by inductor over a cycle. And whole of this power Vrms into Irms manifests as what we say as the reactive power. If you look at this picture here, what is happening? This is the voltage waveform. This is the current waveform. Current is lagging the voltage by 90 degrees. So for example, if you see the current peak and the voltage peak, current peak is identical, current peak is coming 90 degrees behind, and the red is the instantaneous current into instantaneous voltage. So if this first quarter of the cycle where it is positive, for example, this indicates that the inductor is, the current is flowing into the inductor, positive current is flowing, voltage is also positive, so inductor is absorbing energy and storing it in the form of magnetic energy. So it increases up to this point, and then it starts, one of them change their sign, the voltage here has changed its sign, the current is still a positive, so whatever it's got as magnetic energy, it started returning next quarter of the cycle, it started returning it back to the source, and then again half of the cycle, this is what happened. So here again the instantaneous power associated with it is 0, and the story kind of continues. So what essentially an inductor in this case is doing is, whatever it takes for some time, it is not used for doing any work or storage or nothing. It returns it back the next quarter of cycle. It again gets it back in the form of, it gets energy from the source back, stores it at magnetic energy for some time, again returns everything back. If there is no resistance anywhere in the circuit to dissipate something, an idealized kind of a system, ideal inductor and an ideal AC source. The game that it is playing is like a tennis kind of thing. Energy comes for a quarter of cycle from the source to the sink. Sink doesn't do anything, keeps on storing it. Next quarter of cycle it again returns it back, again keeps on happening all this. And so we see a current, really a current flowing, we see a voltage, we see V into I, but we see no work actually being done. So the Vi cos phi is 0, and this is what we call it as a reactive power. Now when you talk of a capacitor, and this is a double frequency oscillation. Now if you talk of a capacitor, the whole thing is happening just in a dip, in the up. It is also same phenomena is happening. Let's look at the capacitor equation with the fixed capacitance. Current is C times dV by dt, as we saw last time. Let us say that the voltage is a sinusoid. If the voltage is a sinusoid, then the current is V cosine function, which is omega C Vm cos of omega t plus phi. Again you substitute it here, so this becomes P of t, and which is just a double frequency oscillation, and the average goes to 0. But so the figure here looks similar, except for the fact that the current here is leading the voltage by 90 degrees. In the inductor, the current was lagging by 90 degrees. Here the current is leading by 90 degrees. And what this causes is this double frequency lobes. If for capacitor are coming like this, then if there was an inductor connected, it would come just the opposite way. This red line would first come down, then come up, come down, and come this. I have changed my references in the two figures. That's why you are not able to see that, because I didn't want to do any integration. So I here started with this, did a differentiation and went into it. I didn't keep one reference which is either voltage or current. So that's why I am not able to see it. But what is there is, but that is still very precisely captured by your phasor diagram. The capacitor current leads by 90 degrees, inductor current lags by 90 degrees. So because of that, the double frequency one term will be, one is like plus Vrms Vm Im by 2 sine of 2 omega t plus phi. If you maintain all references properly, other will be minus of Vm Im by 2 sine of 2 omega t plus phi, which is just to say that the other fellow has in some sense a cancelling effect. So you could create a play, if you had an inductor and a capacitor together, you could create a play in which the magnetic energy is transferred to the electrical form and the electrical energy is transferred back to the magnetic form, and the play between them goes on, and to a source nothing is seen once the play is started in a steady state. So that's why I said that the capacitance have in some sense, as far as reactive power is concerned, a capacitor has some kind of a cancelling effect with respect to the inductor. Because when if you took a same source, if you took a voltage, if you took a system, if you created a system like this, okay, so this is Vm sine of omega t. What we will do is, we know inductor is VL di by dt, and let me treat everything as a complex exponential. I am coming to complex exponential very soon. Sines and cosines are related through complex exponential, Euler's identity with the complex exponential. Cos of omega of t is e to the power j omega t plus So essentially, if you are able to analyze with e to the power j omega t, then you are able to analyze with this also. And if the circuit is linear, a plane superposition implies that you are able to analyze cosine or sine also. So let's keep, if you do this way, and so if I of t is, for example, this, what does this tell you? V is equal to e to the power j omega n. Yeah, V is e to the power e j omega. So there is a 90-degree phase shift. Voltage is rotated forward by a 90 degrees here. And if you talk of current, I equal to CV, capacitor, and if you put V equal to e to the power j omega t, what does this say? This says I equal to j omega c e to the power j omega t. So what do you see here? It says that the current will be rotated by a 90 degree because of this square root of -1 with respect to the voltage. So if you have this as the voltage, this is the inductor current. In phasor notation, this is the inductor current and this is the this thing. So I'll come to that. I have a slide on this. They have a opposite this thing. So therefore, what essentially it means is that you could create an interplay of electric and magnetic field between them because of the opposite action, and reduce what is being drawn from this current, which is to say that reactive power of one is being cancelled by the reactive power of other.
So we will use like spring basically.
Yeah, like instead of playing this game of power transfer with the source, you could create the game of tennis from here to here and here to here without bringing this part into play. And so if this is where long transmission lines are involved, then no current would flow over this, or it would be reduced as per what you choose this C to be, and therefore the losses in this will be reduced.
So what they do in houses is that they put
A shunt capacitor.
Shunt capacitor.
If you go to IIT substation, you will find there is a shunt capacitor, because as I said, overall the systems are inductive. Your meters are inductive, your transmission lines are predominantly inductive, your motors are inductive, your transformers are inductive. So you would be drawing, because of it, say your power factor is, say your angle is 30 degrees, then only 0.866 of it is the real power which you are getting, the remaining is reactive power. But so essentially what it means is, if you, let's put it this way, this would explain to you very clearly importance of power factor. Let's say I want to do 1 watt of work and I want 1 voltage. I have a voltage of 1 and a current of 1 ampere. So voltage, this is one condition which I have got. Other way could be, so P is equal to Vi cos phi. P I want it to be 1, P I want it to be 1. So V into I cos phi, if it is power factor is 1, then P is equal to V into I. Now if the power factor is 0.8, let's say, cos of phi is 0.8, then 1 is equal to V into I into 0.8, which essentially means that V of I is 1 by 0.8 or 1.125. So I am given a 220 volt supply, right? So I am given a 220 volt supply here. My house, my building, whatever is connected across it. And in the first case, my V into, so V is always 220. So V is always 220. But now my V into I required to do the same thing is 1 into 1.125. So that means effectively so much extra current has to flow through this line for me to do the same work. But this thing will translate through the system. This will essentially finally has to come from the system. So therefore in the system I square R will increase. and if the transmission lines, the distribution lines are carrying larger current, then the voltage drop across them will also increase. So that means I am dealing with more voltage regulation problem, and I am dealing with more losses in the system. So to avoid that, I should bring my power factor close to unity. So whatever VI I am getting is being used for doing work and not, or in other words, I am doing the work with minimum current. In some sense, I am trying to do work with minimum current, and therefore the utility is always for industrial consumers, not household, but industrial consumers. IIT is, for example, treated as an industrial consumer. We get supply at 22 kV. So we have a stringent requirement on keeping power factor close to unity. If it is beyond some limit like 0.95 or so, then we get penalized for poor power factor. And this is done, since most of it is inductive, it is done by putting shunt capacitor banks.
Why doesn't this apply to domestic use?
No, I mean at some utility will do it, like for a residential consumer at the distribution transformer they should be doing it. They should still be doing it, but since each of our houses are very small amount of power and so on and so forth, the aggregation they are like, these are in megawatts, right? We are like 5 megawatts for example, we are around 5 megawatts. But a house is like reasonably small, and so they have not put that burden on us. But where they are aggregating it, they should be doing it.
What if you do it at the building level?
Well, it's good. There is no harm in doing it at a building
The
level.
effect of that be, if you put a shunt capacitor at the building level,
Yeah.
does that mean that transient loads, right, in the local point will get drawn from the shunt and not from the transmission line?
No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. It really doesn't mean that. The transient, there will be capacitor will have some interplay. The transients will be modified. I am pretty sure about that the transients will be modified due to presence of capacitor, but it's not really true that the capacitor will be able to supply that transient. So for example, when you switch on a motor, a big motor for example, with a shunt, with and without the shunt capacitor, the transients are going to be different. But it's not true that even if the capacitor was already there when you switched on the motor, so the capacitor will help in probably reducing the transient, but it's not true that the transients will go away. That is, that it will properly and completely take care of it. But it will modify this thing and maybe help also. But at the same time, capacitors can burst also or fail also, because the current across the capacitor is C dV by dt. So if there is a voltage spike for example, then a very large current will flow through the capacitor due to this and it will go away. So your capacitors have to be maintained and all that kind of stuff. So typically for commercial and industrial consumers, at some point of time they will say power factor correction should be done, but for residential consumers they don't enforce that, but it still means that they do themselves that when they aggregate it at a distribution transformer level. They should be doing it at some point they have to do it. They will do it probably at the distribution transformer level or distribution substation level, one of the two places. Typically substations would have capacitors, if not the transformers.
So can't we do this in the basic, every electrical device? We can use the capacitor to, so that the power factor is...
No, but just I told you like this. First of all, you have to have your device should have capacitor, so it needs space. Second is any spike comes, if it goes away, who will maintain it? Right? So and as far as you are concerned, I mean power system requires it, but you don't see as a benefit of it. Right? So you know, like it's done at that level.
In the old fans, I remember in the mid-70s.
No, that is for starting. The capacitor which is there in the single phase motors is for starting purpose.
I see.
It's not for compensation purpose.
So once they start, they don't have any...
They really don't have a role to play. I mean, if they give you any benefit, it is just incidental. They are there basically to provide a starting function.
But at times when we replace the capacitor, it seems that the fan works faster.
Yeah, so I said they can have some incidental benefits. I have not analyzed the incidental benefits. But a single phase motor cannot start of its own. Of its own, only a multi-phase motor can start, like a 3-phase motor. So the capacitor is essentially used to create some kind of split phase by the time of starting, give it a kind of 2-phase effect to get it moving. Once it gets it moving, it's actually working like a single phase motor. But since the motor is always inductive, a certain capacitance in parallel, if it doesn't come out of the circuit, it would still work.
Sir, which power is measured in meters? Apparent power or actual power?
You measure always the watts. To measure apparent power, typically you would measure voltage separately, current separately, and just do a product. But when you put a wattmeter, for example, you use a wattmeter, you are measuring the watts, the VI cos phi. So if you buy a wattmeter, it measures VI cos phi. To measure VI, you just need to have a voltmeter and ammeter and just measure it and multiply.
No, sir, not in this metrics, provided by electricity.
They will give you everything: power factor, RMS voltage, RMS current, apparent power, reactive power, apparent power. They will give you
billed according to what? According to what? Which power?
active watts, watt hours, what amount of watts into hour. That is the energy. Power is watts. So power into time is energy. We are built for energy which we consume, which is watt hours, and we are not built for reactive power. So therefore we have to keep reactive power small enough. So if only it goes outside certain threshold, then there is a penalty for it.
But if there are also inductive loads,
Yeah.
then it increases the reactive power, right?
Yeah, inductive loads increase, and loads are typically inductive. Because motors, predominantly the biggest source is motors. Anything that involves a transformer has an again iron element coming into it. So typically see that the magnetic energy per unit volume is much more than the electrical energy per unit volume at the numbers that you work with magnetic field and electric field. So most of the work is done through magnetic field rather than through electric field. So I mean, I think I have actually already discussed the Euler's identity. When you e to the power x, you have the infinite series expansion for it. Just assume that x is, for example, j theta. So if x is equal to j theta, then and j square is -1, j cube is minus j, and j to the power 5 will be minus j, and so on. So you could split, the series will split into two forms, and the first form, which is the real form, actually is nothing but a trigonometric series of cos of theta, and the other one is the form of sine of theta. So therefore you have that identity, Euler's identity, that e to the power j theta is cos theta plus j sine theta. And so e to the power minus j theta is cos theta minus j sine theta, and you could do some of those standard things you could do. And if you differentiate this thing, like I got the j omega out earlier, you will get some of these things. And so you could imagine this e to the power j omega as rotating in an anti-clockwise direction. So as p keeps on increasing, you see that it keeps on moving, and from this also you can see that you can see that the projection on the x-axis is cosine, and So if you project it on the x-axis, what you see unit phasor, that is the cosine, and what you project on the imaginary axis, the y-axis, is the sine, and e to the power j omega t can be thought of as a vector which is rotating like that. So now let's introduce a notion of impedance. That's another term which you have to just get used to. So consider a simple series RL circuit which is described by Ri is equal to LdI by Ri plus LdI by dt is equal to V of t. LdI by dt is the voltage across the inductor, and Ri is the voltage across the resistor. So what I have got here is I have a circuit like this, and the current flowing through it is this. So the voltage drop across this is Ri, the voltage drop across this is this. So V of t is R of I plus LdI by dt. And if you say that steady state response is given by, if you say that the voltage is V to the A bar, which is A bar means it's a phasor complex number, into A to the power this, which is same as saying E into A to the power j phi, which is same as saying mod of A into E to the power j omega t plus phi. So if I have a voltage source like this, then I can easily say that my current is also going to be, my claim is that the current is also going to be of the form e to the power j omega t. So I will be of the form, this is my claim, that if V of t is A bar e to the power j of t, then current is going to be of this form, and to check it out I just substitute that current there, and so what I get the equation that V bar, which is A to the power this, is equal to Ri, I don't know what this is, I bar, plus LdI by dt. So again differentiating it, I bar j omega e to the power j omega by t, which means that if I bar is A bar by R plus j omega t, then everything has worked out properly, right? So if your voltage excitation is exponential, e to the power j omega t, complex exponential, then the current will also be of the form of complex exponential with the corresponding magnitude or phasor I bar to be equal to A bar by. So this I plus j omega L is called the impedance associated with this circuit. This is resistance. So equivalently this term is called, similarly this term is called reactance, something like resistance, so reactance, and this is called impedance. And so what we are essentially saying is the following. Let me briefly put it like this. Let us say that V is Vm sine of omega t plus phi. Alright? Then I am going to say that V bar is Vm by root 2 at an angle phi, which sometimes I will also show it as Vm by root 2 polar. I will also show it. Then I of t is Vm by, so this is my phasor. Okay, this is my V phasor. Now the impedance is R. Now Z, if the resistance is R and the inductance is L, then the impedance is R by L. So what I will do is I will say I bar is V bar, which is, let's call this is V bar. So this is V bar by Z. V bar, I bar is, this is the phasor, I bar is V bar by Z. So effectively, let's say tan of theta is omega L by R. In other words, this is R square plus omega square L square at an angle of theta. So then this is Vrms, this Vm by root 2 is Vrms value at an angle phi divided by mod of Z at an angle of theta. This is in the polar form. And so Vrms by mod of Z at an angle of phi minus theta. This is the I bar. So once I have found the I bar, then I can now write, similar to V of t, I can now write that this is RMS value of the current. Phasors are always RMS value. So the peak value is root 2 times of it. Peak value is root 2 times of it. Vrms by Z. Sine of omega t is the reference. Sine of omega t is the reference, and the angle is. So you can do arithmetic in phasor form and translate it in sines. It's not like you are lost touch with the sines and cosines. So if you anytime want to see what's happening in the time domain, just look at it. What was my reference phasor in all this? Reference phasor was sine of omega t. If this was cos of omega t, I would have just put here cos of omega t plus phi minus theta. So, but instead of doing a full analysis every time through the trigonometric quantities, what I do is I write first the phasor form of it, then I calculate the phasor form of current, and the phasor form of current is V bar by Z. So the voltage divided by impedance. Earlier you had current as Ohm's law said voltage divided by voltage drop by resistance. So now this is the equivalent notion of the Ohm's law in the phasor domain, that the voltage divided by voltage drop divided by the impedance is equal to the current, phasor current. Once I got the phasor, at any point of time I can again write the corresponding sinusoid. So working in phasor and working in sinusoids is in time domain is one and the same. Only thing is this makes life more convenient for us. Now, since we are talking of PMUs and things like that, phasor measurement units and so on, I think I should mention here that phasors make sense since provided you have a reference, one common reference, right? Provided you have one common reference. And typically, like, how do you measure a phasor? You do it like this. You have a sinusoid, you sample it. 12 samples per cycle or whatever, you sample it at certain frequency. So you will have a sample and hold, and then A to D converter. If you have many 3-phase voltages and 3-phase currents, for example, then you would have multiple such blocks of sample and hold, then a multiplexer, then a ADC, and then a microcontroller or microprocessor or whatever which is going to do the computation. So what you will do is you will give a sample signal. So you will like, if you have multiple of these 3-phase voltages and currents, so you will sample them, all of them you will sample them simultaneously. Okay, you will sample them simultaneously. Then one by one you would convert them into this thing, and those samples you will acquire it into your this thing. Once you have acquired it here, you typically do what is known as a discrete Fourier transform. Most typically what is done is you simply do a discrete Fourier transform, and what that DFT does is it gives you equivalently, it just gives you the phasor. Effectively, like some scaling factor is there, you have to in DFT you can, how you choose your small things are there, little bit of factors to be adjusted and so on, but then you will essentially get by doing a discrete Fourier transform, you will just get the phasor. Now, so if you have so many phasors and if you are sampling them simultaneously like the way I showed you here, then what it means is, though I don't know which is a common reference, that is actually sort of decided by the clock which I am using, but all these phasors are consistent with respect to one common reference, even though I don't know which one it is here, they are all consistent with respect to one common reference, and hence on my phasors, hence I can do things like impedance is V by Z, power is Vi star and so on, because they are all consistent phasors. So this is how you will do, for example, in a relay or in a substation, where one clock can be used to sample all of them, you will automatically get consistent phasors. But what the problem was for a long time, that when I have some substations which are hundreds of kilometers apart and I am calculating phasors, then the phasors in one substation didn't have some consistency with respect to phasors in another substation, because in some sense I am not able to make this sampling simultaneous. Another way to put it is, a more simpler way to put it is that my time reference in the two substations are not identical. If I want to, let's say this is one voltage waveform, okay, this is in that substation, this is the t equal to 0, and this is another substation which has, suppose, some another waveform, another sine wave, which is this. So if the time reference is perfectly aligned in the two substations, then I can say that this phasor is lagging this phasor, let's say, by an angle of 10 degrees. I can, let's say this is good. But in the second substation, if this time reference is not properly aligned with respect to this thing, then if I measure this at t, this measurement will be erroneous. This zero crossing measurement will be erroneous. So my angle calculation will go wrong. RMS value calculation is not going to go wrong. RMS or magnitude of the phasor calculation will come correct, but the angle calculation will not come correctly. So essentially this was the problem, and what GPS has permitted us to do, the geographical positioning system, what it has allowed us to do is, it gives you a signal of 1 PPS, 1 pulse per second, with an accuracy of 1 microsecond, which if you translate to angular angle, what is the corresponding inaccuracy, maximum inaccuracy which will come in angle, then it is 2 pi f into this delta t, which is the inaccuracy here, which is only some 0.018 degrees or something like that. You just check it out, some very small number at 50 hertz, which amounts to saying that essentially what I told you just now, that you are able to measure. So one simple way would be just cross t where this zero crossing is, conceptually where this zero crossing is, take a timestamp, look where this zero crossing is, take a timestamp, then if this was T1, this was T2, T1 minus T2 is where, how these two are differencing. So 2 pi f into this is the phase angle difference, between these two. But your timestamp should be very accurate, and that timestamp accuracy you are getting through This is not the way it is done. It is done through the DFT way, the way I told you. This is not the way it is done. But just to explain the concept, then you could very clearly measure it. But if you could not align this t equal to 0 axis across wide area properly, then your angular measurements would be in error. And even if your timestamps inaccuracy was like 5 millisecond, our 50 Hertz system, the time period is 20 milliseconds. So even if your inaccuracy is 5 milliseconds, it translates into an error of almost 90 degrees in angle calculation. So that's why this GPS, because 1/4 of a quarter of a cycle, so 90 degrees phase, this thing. So that's why, like on the internet network time protocol, if you use, you are able to measure frequency accurately, but you are not able to derive clocks from this which measures phasors very accurately. So GPS has helped in that, and so measurement of phasors with time alignment done through GPS essentially is called a synchrophasor, and devices which do that are called phasor measurement units. So basically your timestamp and clocks, for example, through GPS, and then measure phasor. So that a device which does that is called a PMU or a phasor measurement unit, and so it has a very accurate. So what PMUs essentially do is they measure phasors where this is synchronized to the GPS, and they measure phasors either every cycle, that is every 20 milliseconds, or every 2 cycles, like 25 Hertz. Instead of 50 Hertz, they may do it at 25 Hertz. So every 2 cycles they will measure a phasor, or they may do it at 10 Hertz, which is even slower rate. But whatever they do, at some specified rate, 50 Hertz, 25 Hertz or 10 Hertz, these are some of the common standard rates which they use. They measure it by the phasors at a particular location, maybe 3 voltages, 3 currents in every substation and so on. Then timestamp it, because they are measuring every 20 milliseconds or 40 milliseconds, so you have to know which phasor came for which time. So they timestamp it and then pass it on to some central place. If you are measuring it so many places, unless you bring it somewhere, there is no notion of a geographical control or a wide area control. So you transmit it to some central place where a device known as PDC, phasor data concentrator, it aligns all this thing and places nicely into a aligns it and gives it to some analytic engine, whatever you want to do with it. All it does it collates all of them, aligns it, looks which is good phasor, bad phasor, and so on. Like if GPS is not for some signal, is lost for some reason, a PMU when it sends will say that my GPS signal was lost, so you can discard it and so on, and then gives it to some analytic, whatever you want to run beyond that, and that is essentially the wide area measurement technology. What's the time?
So you say that it's like the central station is like a conductor which is correcting the phase.
Correcting.
No, correcting also?
No correction.
No correction.
The PDC is only acquiring all these phasors. Phasor data concentrator is only acquiring. So one by one, they all keep on sending the data to this PDC. PDC will finally just stream it out to some analytical engine, whatever you want to correct.
So this gives you some data, right, about the phase difference of various
yes.
sources, right? So how is that used at the end of the day?
Okay, so that is not a story which can be done in 5 minutes. Means like it will be very difficult to like compress it in 5 minutes, but half an hour will be required to like explain what all are the plans to do with it.
We discussed a few queries on this later in the first class. So,
Queries on?
on the data that's collected,
Yeah.
so that you can determine, for example, faults and failures and
Yeah. So no, but like how it is used, like one thing is like estimating the state of the system, that is the beginning point of it. So this is, see, PMU is a very accurate device, but the sensor sitting behind it, which is a voltage transformer and a current transformer, may not be very accurate. Like they are still magnetic elements. So first thing is that if I have multiple number of PMU data available coming in a system, I should estimate the state of the system. Second thing is I should probably try to calibrate, because some of the sensors are accurate, some of the sensors are not very accurate, so I can probably use it for calibration. Third is like most of the line impedances and line transmission line parameters which I use, they are all obtained by design calculations, they are not the measured values. So I can use these devices to like validate or actually calculate the corresponding transmission line parameters, so validation and calculation of transmission line parameters. These are simple applications, these are the simple applications, or what I would say low hanging fruits of it. The higher hanging fruits of it is like, for example, to detect is control. I mean, is the higher hanging fruits would be like, will the system become unstable? I can connect the analytic to it. Once I have got an accurate, what it means is that these are giving me a very nice accurate time snapshots of the system. Now on those time snapshots of the system, I could do stability analysis, for example, and do some kind of a tool to, I could see whether the system would, for example, tend to become unstable if left as it is. Then I could develop some control analytics on it, and for example say that okay, if my prediction says that this system will become unstable, or my analytics says that the stability margin is too small, then I could do something to improve the stability margin. Or if my prediction is that the system is going to be unstable, then like break it into multiple islands and run it. Like for example, we had that major blackout in July, and if there was a WAM system in place, we would probably have saved that kind of a event, because we could have analyzed that this system would very quickly break away if we had some standard tools and things like that in the place, analytics in place. Then we could have probably said that yes, this system is too close to the instability and something needs to be done which will prevent it from becoming unstable. So that is, I think, finally that is the fruit that we are looking for, that very accurate prediction of stability or stability margins, if not stability, proper accurate assessment of stability margins, and real time out of step prediction, that is whether a certain disturbance is stable or unstable. If it is stable, let it proceed, block some of the devices which tend to maloperate, pick it wrongly. That is adaptive control kind of application. And if on the other hand your assessment is that it is actually system is going to break, it has become unstable for some reason, then break it into multiple parts, each of which could run independently, and once you are able to make each of them stable, then you could again restart interconnecting them. So instead of going into blackout, you would probably go into some kind of a brownout and simply come back out of that brownout rather than coming out of a blackout. So those are like still bit far. I mean, it's there. That's what we are trying to hit to. So there are some low-hanging fruits somewhere, in some fruits in the middle level, and then some fruits at the high level. So we'll take
We have a class now, right?
Yeah.
Any one question?
No, I can take multiple questions. No issue.
Sir, you said PDC have a data, but it says good signal, bad signal.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by
No, PMU will when time stamping it will tell you whether the GPS was properly functioning or not functioning. If the GPS signal was not available, it will mark it that it is not available, and if after certain time span the GPS is still not come back, then it simply discarded. Kedar is, you could ask a lot of questions to Kedar on PDC. His whole MTP was on that, so you could ask him all of the questions regarding PDC and IEEE synchrophasor standards 100 and C118, which deal with this. What is the configuration frame, what is the data frame, what is the header, how it is sent, how PDC aligns it, all that kind of questions.
So, and the PMU device is used to measure the statistic or predict the statistic to know this system will work in future or not. But how we say smart grid are self-healing healing system. So if there is some loss in the path and they found the new path for the electricity supply, so what device will use in that case? PMU will not work.
See, PMU is just a measuring device. It is only doing a measuring part. Self-healing is the end goal that you want to reach. Right now it is not a self-healing network. Self-healing network is the end goal. Now to achieve that, you should have a lot of control systems in place. There are already a lot of control systems in place, but still it is not a self-healing network. For example, as I said, if the system breaks, it breaks very rapidly. In few seconds it breaks, right? So no manual intervention will prevent that kind of a thing. So if you want to, if you predict there is a instability, first question is, can you do it prediction accurately? If you wrongly predict a stable event as unstable event and start breaking the systems and later on find that, you will get a hit, like people will slap you. This is a very funny world. If it breaks and you are not predicting it properly, you will be slapped that you didn't do your job properly. And if it was stable and unnecessarily you islanded it and lost some load, you will again be slapped for the fact that you didn't do. So prediction in real time, any real time event, stability prediction and control action, the accuracy of prediction is a critical thing. Unless you are able to that's what we talk in relaying in terms of dependability and security. Dependability is like what I was trying to diagnose. Actually that had happened. That is the dependability. And security is related to mal-operation. Like I diagnosed it wrongly and did something. So that is a loss of security. So your challenge is to be dependable and to be secure in your decision making. So therefore, first of all, this prediction is a tricky thing, and people are using decision trees and things like that nowadays to do it, because you are not still able to do it in real time. So you are trying to use decision trees and things like that to get a good handle on stability prediction. If you are able to do stability prediction properly, then as I said, you should still have many controllers in the place. Like breaking it into multiple subsystems is the last resort action. First is like stability margin reduces. If I had lot of controllers in place, I could immediately use them and do something about it. So there is what are known as flexible AC transmission systems. Under that there are a lot of controllers which are available, which could be used to including HVDC, which could be used to dampen out the oscillations. Oscillations will be unstable, means they go unbounded, but there could be oscillations which could be simply damped out pretty quickly using those controllers. But then the control signals will come through this PMU, PDC, some analytics sitting on it, then it will tell, they do this, do that, and that kind of stuff.
So one last question.
Yeah.
Is this prediction, is it a technological problem or is it a computational problem?
Mathematical.
Do we not have devices which can measure something and say whether it is stable or unstable, or is it we don't know what is called stability in an electrical circuit, a huge electrical circuit?
He's asking whether stability can be measured directly as opposed to being assessed through other.
Given a large circuit, is there a concrete notion of what is instability?
Yeah.
And so if there is an established notion, are we, is it hard to detect the instability, as in technologically, are there instruments not made, or we do have instruments, it's just that you require too
No,
many?
you can make, see, like, okay, I have a spring mass system like this, and suppose I pull this fellow with some force here, this fellow with some F1 and F2, right, and leave it. If I have not exerted too much of pull, and this is a friction, there is some friction, it will oscillate for some time and again come back to original position. Maybe it will move a bit here in the process, there may be some translation, but over a period of time it will come back here. But suppose these forces were very large, and imagine that the spring is not linear, spring is non-linear, just to keep your life a bit more, just to not be in your comfort zone, just imagine that the spring is non-linear. Then what may happen, so what may happen is that it will simply break, the spring will break and the two masses will fly away. So if you are looking at the position, difference in the position between the two masses, let's say it was initially here, and if this disturbance was not very large, then the angular separation may go like this. Maybe it will go to, there could be some, this is because I am plotting difference. If I just plot each one of them, that would be a separate story. I have just plotted the difference, this is what is happening. But if it is unstable, then maybe it will start like this, and then it will not take this point, it will simply go up. If it breaks, it simply goes up. So what my transducers are telling me, they are telling me position, velocity, all of that they are telling me. They don't tell me what is the actual spring constant here. That's the whole system is like modeled with some spring constant here, but I don't have everything, I don't know everything about this to say what this spring constant is. I actually probably even don't know everything to say what exactly these two masses are also. But I am able to monitor this trajectory. My question is whether it will come back like this. Sometimes it may come back like this for some time and then also like go away. So this is like first cycle instability, second cycle instability, and so on. So when I am measuring angles with PMUs or whatever, I know exactly what is happening here, but I am not able to say whether it will return from here or it will simply run away. That is the prediction problem.
How much time does that take to run away?
Oscillations are of the order of 0.5 to 2 Hertz. Electromechanical oscillations, because of the inertia of the machine, are of the, we are talking of here frequency range of 0.5 to 2 Hertz. That's why 10 Hertz PMU sampling is also adequate. It's okay with respect to the Nyquist criteria. Because your sampling frequency depends upon what application you have in mind. But even 10 Hertz is okay for a stability prediction kind of a tool, because you are talking of around oscillations which are of the order of 0.5 to 2 Hertz. Slow moving phasors. These are not high frequency transients like lightning striking on the this thing, or something being switched in the motor being connected or disconnected. Those will create very high frequency transients. These faults and related issues are electromechanical transients of the order of 0.5 to 2 Hertz. That's what we are talking about. So does that answer your question?
Basically, it means that we don't have an idea of the loads in
Idea
real
of?
time. What exact load is being exerted?
No, I said I can measure angles, but I can't tell you I am not able to tell you from this measurement, I have to, if I have these three measurements, I have to save this time series, how this time series will further develop. That's what I have to predict. But that is something which I am not able to predict. That is where the prediction problem, the difficulty of this is the difficulty of any time series prediction problem. Right? Like I have so much of data in the past, if I can calculate this properly, then I am done. It could be done using laws of physics, but then again, there are many things like induction motor, for example. If the frequency drops, the amount of power that it consumes reduces. But at any point of time, how much of my load in the system is induction motor, how much of it is lighting, I have no idea. So each of these devices have a certain, when you look at the aggregate level, each of the device has its own characteristic, right? They are like each one of you, means as a class in a steady state I can model you in certain way, but when I want to model you as individuals, each of you have a different response to the same thing. Similarly, many of these devices, they have different response to the transient, their response is not same. And I am not having that kind of a data like how many induction motors were on, how many light loads were on, how many ACs were on. So therefore I don't have even I know how much load is connected in a steady sense with my system. But if you say what is the load response, the dynamic response of the loads, I don't know what is the dynamic response of the loads. So if I knew everything, then I could go to the laws of physics and tell what is the next. But since I don't know everything about what I have connected in this system, I am not able to tell it.
Thus in the architecture in a place like India, you don't even know the number of and kind of consumers you have.
Yeah, even, yeah. So that's why I cannot do some physics based thing and say this is the next thing. Because I don't know what exactly is there. I know aggregately these many megawatts are there, I can measure. So I will have these time series points, but I have to predict the further time series, and any time series calculation is, then the whole story starts, like how accurately you are doing it, uncertainty, modeling, so it's all that comes into picture. So therefore there is a prediction problem. Yeah? Okay. Thank you.
It's time for the Soman.